I love coming to the USA and I love baseball. I love the way you guys do baseball. And I love the way you guys do the rally cap. And we all know what the rally cap is. When your team is losing, you grab your normal cap and then you put it on maybe sideways, upside down, inside out. Because what the rally cap says is this: we need to flip things around because whatever we're doing right now is not working. So we need to try something else. Maybe flip things around, inside out, upside down. But maybe that's how life feels right now. Whatever we're doing is not working. We're doing everything they told us to do. We're doing everything we can to be happy, but somehow it's not working. We're miserable, we're exhausted, and we're tired. So maybe we too need to flip things around upside down. So today I want to look at unleashing the power of paradox, flipping the script on an upside down world, because whatever we're doing is not working. So maybe there's a paradox that we need to expose, unleash, and flip. And in particular, I want to look at this, the paradox of happiness. And I'm going to do this by looking at a story that Jesus tells in the pages of the Bible. And I'm using a story from Jesus because usually when Jesus tells a story, there's a paradox in the story. And Jesus uses the paradox to flip our script upside down the right way back up. And our question today is this: well, what do I have to do to be happy? And to answer this, I'm going to look at a strange story that we rarely hear in the Bible. And it's a strange story where Jesus tells a story of a dishonest manager. And this manager, he does follow the script. But in the story, there will be a paradox. And Jesus is going to use this paradox to flip the script for us. So let's begin. What is the script? How can I be happy? This is what we get told. You got to do whatever it takes to be happy. Now, I forgot to warn you, this is going to be a 30-minute talk from me where I answer the question, how can we be happy? And it'll be followed by question and answer from you guys. So as I'm speaking, think of whatever question you want to ask, text it to that number, and I'll do my best to answer that question when this talk is over. So what do we have to do to be happy? Well, the script we're told is this: you got to do whatever it takes to be happy. Let's look at the story. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager, the dishonest manager, was accused of wasting his possessions. So we meet this manager who's dishonest. But why not? Because you got to do whatever it takes to be happy. He's following the script that we too have been given. And we can't blame him, because how would you complete this? How would you complete this? Well, it's already completed. I want my children to be happy, of course. But I love it when I go to an Asian church. I go to a Chinese church. And whenever I do this, they go, no, it's successful. And I go, no. The reason why you came to the West was because you want your children to be happy. If you wanted your children to be successful, a doctor, a lawyer, you should have stayed in Asia, but you came here to the West because this is the script of the Western world. I want my children to be happy. And that's a whole script of the United States of America, because there in the USA Declaration of Independence, it says this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This nation was founded on this principle. This nation fought a war to break away from Europe so it could pursue happiness on its own terms. The whole foundation of Western democracy is we need to pursue happiness on our own terms. And it's a great storyline. It's the reason why philosophers come up with this position called utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But how do we define good? Well, it's whatever creates maximum pleasure, whatever creates maximum happy. So we judge an action as morally good if it makes us happy, and we judge an action to be morally bad if it makes us unhappy. We're meant to pursue happiness on our own terms. It's the reason why when you see your high school counselor and you ask her, what job should I do? Well, if you're in Asia, she would say, well, what do your parents want you to do? But if you're in the West, she will say, well, what do you want to do? Do whatever makes you happy. And it's a great storyline. It is the reason why you can date whoever you want, not who mum and dad want you to date. It's the reason why you can live in whatever city you want, not where mum and dad grew up. It's the reason why you can choose the job you want, not the job that mum and dad want you to do. It's a great storyline. Only you can choose. You do whatever makes you happy. But if it's such a good storyline, why? Why are we miserable, exhausted, and tired? Why? Because there is a paradox. And the paradox of happiness is this. If I'm trying to be happy, well, why aren't I happy? Let's go back to the story. So the rich man called in this dishonest manager, and he asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, well, what shall I do now? My boss is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. The wheels fall off. This man does whatever it takes to be happy, but somehow his life falls apart. He's unhappy. What's going on here? Well, this is the paradox of happiness. And there are at least three things going on here. Paradox number one is what we call hedonic adaptation. Well, what is hedonic adaptation? This is hedonic adaptation. When I first wake up in the morning, I make myself a cup of coffee, and when I drink it, the buzz just fills me from top to toe. But about 10 in the morning, I have my second cup of coffee, and this time there's a little bit of buzz, but not so much. And at 2 in the afternoon, when there's a staff meeting, I have my third cup of coffee, and this time, no buzz. What is going on? My body has adapted to the coffee. It has recalibrated to the coffee and adjusted to it as if it is the new normal. So it has no effect on me anymore. This is what goes on with hedonic adaptation. It is the reason when you push a kid on a swing, the kid keeps saying, higher, 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 until you get the kids almost horizontal and almost looping the loop, and they're still saying higher, higher, because they have adapted to it as a new norm. They need you to go higher. It is the reason why when you were a little child, you would beg your parents to get you the new toy. But your parents would always say, you're only going to get sick of it. But you would say, no, not this time. This time for sure, I will never get sick of this toy. So your parents buy you the toy, but you get sick of it. You've adjusted to it as if it was a new normal. This goes on all the time. This is Jonathan Haidt, writer, speaker, author, psychologist, in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, secular, atheist writer. But he talks about the hedonic adaptation. He says, whatever gives you a burst of happiness, it lasts about 1-2 years at the most, and then you're back to where you were before. So Jonathan Haidt says, hey, you can get a new car and you get a burst of happiness. You can get a new job and there'll be a burst of happiness. You can get a new romantic partner and there'll be a burst of happiness, but it only lasts 1 or 2 years at the most, and you're back to where you were before. In Germany, they did this study, and it's called the Marriage Life Satisfaction Curve. Have a look at how the marriage life satisfaction curve works. So you get married in the middle of that curve, right in the middle, on the x-axis. Happiness is the vertical y-axis. So 4 years before you got married, you were single. You were rumbling along at 3 out of 10 when it came to happiness. Then you meet someone 2 years before you get married. Woo! Bing! Now you're happy, 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 happy. On the day you get married, you are the happiest you will ever be. 7 out of 10. Right after getting married, poof, it is like a vertical cliff. You're free falling from there. 2 years later, you are back to where you were before. 5 years later, you're less happy than you were before you got married. I love showing this graph because everyone wants to laugh because it is funny, but every married guy is sitting there just rigid right now, too afraid to laugh, aren't you? And your wife keeps looking at you like, is that you? Is that you? You go, no. That is a German study. I'm American. But we adapted to the new norm. We recalibrated. Paradox number 2, it's called the arrival fallacy. And I'm getting this from Arthur C. Brooks, writer, podcaster, author, especially writes in The Atlantic. He talks about how to build a happy life. And he talks about the arrival fallacy. And he says chasing happiness, well, it's like the dog chasing the car. The dog chases the car, but when the dog gets the car, now the dog doesn't know what to do. And it's the same. We chase happiness, but once we find what we're looking for, we think, is that it? This is Jill Stark. She wrote this book, Happy Never After, and it's described her experience where she wrote a previous book which became, boom, a success. It was a top 10 bestseller. And when she wrote this book and when it succeeded, at that moment, she went, is that it? Is that all it is? I thought it would be something more. And then it sent her spiraling into anxiety and depression. Happy never after. And apparently this is very common for writers because they invest their life, years into this work. They launch it, it succeeds, but that's as happy as they will ever be. And they thought, it will be something more. Paradox number 3 is this, is what we call the hedonic fallacy. The hedonic fallacy is this. Philosophers say, if you chase happiness, you will not find it. That's the hedonic fallacy. By trying to find happiness, you're guaranteed not to find happiness. Why? Because happiness is the byproduct of something else. So you actually can't find happiness by chasing happiness itself. I was listening to National Public Radio and they interviewed a lady in her 20s. And this is what she said. We grew up with our parents saying, we just want you to be happy. Be happy, they said. I mean, if your parents tell you to get a job and make money, at least you know when you've achieved those things. But we grew up with our parents saying, we just want you to be happy. So you end up sitting around being like, well, did I do this thing that my parents told me to do? Like, am I happy? Have I achieved it yet? You're anxious because your parents essentially said to you, the most important thing is for you to be happy. You chase it, and the chase itself trips you up and makes you less happy. By looking for happiness, we end up less happy. That's the hedonic fallacy. So what can we do? Well, we need to flip the script. And here we flip the script by saying, you know what? It's not about happiness. Maybe we've been chasing the wrong thing. It's not about happiness. And let's have a look at the story then. The manager said to himself, I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his boss's debtors and he asked the first, well, how much do you owe my boss? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, psst, take your bill, sit down quickly, make it $4.50. Then the manager asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied, and the manager told him, take your bill, make it 800. The boss commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly, wisely. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it's gone, you be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Now notice what Jesus is saying here. He's not saying be dishonest like the dishonest manager. What Jesus is saying here is if the dishonest manager can work it out, surely you people who are honest, you too can work it out. So what is it that we're meant to work out? What has a dishonest manager done? How has he flipped the script? How has he changed his value system? What is he chasing now instead? Well, flip number one. It's actually not about happiness. It's about relationships. That's the first flip. It's not about happiness. We shouldn't be chasing happiness. We should be chasing relationships instead. Now, think about all the things that give us pleasure. Oh, eating gives us pleasure. Imagine eating a stack of pancakes drowned in maple syrup. See, that's making us happy. Imagine watching a movie. That makes us happy. Imagine traveling. That makes us happy. But did you notice with all these things that make us happy, they're only happy if we do them with someone. They're actually quite miserable to do if you're by yourself. And so if you do eat a stack of pancakes by yourself, you end up taking a picture of it, uploading on social media. Hey, look what I'm doing. And everyone says, hey, yes, look what you're doing. So you're sharing the moment. So you're not eating by yourself. If you travel by yourself, you're always taking selfies and people sharing the moment with you. It's not what we do that makes us happy. It's who we're doing it with that makes us happy. This is Sophie Scott in her TED Talk. She's a neuroscientist. What makes us laugh? And she says we're 20 times more likely to laugh at something if we're in the company of someone we know, love, and trust. It's not what we do, it's who we do it with, who we share the moment with that makes us happy. This is Robert Waldinger, not a Christian, in the most watched TED Talk of all time. And it's called What Makes a Good Life. And he references the famous Harvard study where they looked at the lives of 70 men over 70 years and they traced their lives longitudinally and they asked the question, well, what makes a good life? And they found that the number one correlation with happiness and a healthy life, the number one correlation with happiness was not whether you had paid off your house or not. The number one correlation with happiness was not whether you had $1 million or not. The number one correlation with happiness was not whether you were the CEO of a company or not. The number one correlation with happiness was, did you have somebody in your life to share it with? And we're not talking just about romantic relationships. We're talking about friendships. Are you lonely or do you have someone to share your life with? It's not what we do, it's not what we own that makes us happy. It's, do I have someone to share this life with that makes us happy? Flip number two. It's actually not about happiness, it's about purpose. We shouldn't be chasing happiness. Instead, we should be chasing purpose. Now, when I grew up in Australia, I played a lot of rugby. I even played rugby when I was at college. I played rugby when I was doing PhD studies in Chicago. I love rugby. And I had a friend who also played rugby with me all these years. But one day, my friend stopped playing rugby. And his name was Alan. I said, Alan, what's going on? How come you're not playing rugby anymore? And Alan said, well, I was playing a game of rugby, and we were in one of those scrum things, and there was a big guy just standing on my head. And at that moment, I asked myself the question, why? Why am I doing this? I don't have to be doing this. So why am I doing this? And once I couldn't answer the why question, I just stopped doing it. See, we actually have to be able to answer the why question. Why am I doing this? We actually need a purpose, a reason for doing things. This is Paul Dolan. He has a PhD in happiness, not a Christian. He's written this book, Happiness by Design, and he argues that it's actually not pleasure that makes us happy, it's purpose that makes us happy. He says, see, you can have pleasure and you can have purpose. And there are things that give us pleasure but no purpose, like eating pizza by yourself in front of the TV on a Friday night gives you pleasure. No purpose. So after a while, it feels a little bit empty and unfulfilling. But there are things that have purpose but no pleasure, like studying for an exam, helping a friend move house, giving birth to a child. Purpose, no pleasure, but they become very deeply fulfilling. It's purpose that we're looking for. This is the famous book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Jewish Holocaust survivor, and he says we need purpose. He says we shouldn't look for suffering, but suffering will find us. And the only way to survive and navigate suffering is if we have purpose. Suffering will make us a better person, but only if we have purpose. And he gives the fictitious parable of the lives of two fictitious women. He says the first woman, through the fortunes of life, she is born beautiful, rich, and successful. Second woman, through the misfortunes of life, she gives birth to a child with profound disabilities. The first woman, at the end of her life, will ask herself, what was all that about? I had a lot of money, I went to a lot of parties, I flirted with a lot of men, but what was all that about? The second woman will say, wow, I raised a child with profound disabilities, and she will have a rich, fulfilling life because she lived not just for herself, but for someone else. She had a story bigger than just her own story. And that's what we need. We need a story bigger than just our own story. But where do we find this story that's bigger than just our own story? Well, we need purpose. But to have purpose, we need design. But to have design, we need a designer. To have a designer, we actually need a loving, personal God who's behind this universe. And that's what Jesus promises us. On the pages of the Bible, it says this, the Logos, which is a Greek word, the Logos became flesh and lived among us. And it's talking about Jesus. It's saying Jesus is the Logos. And the Greek word Logos can be translated so many ways. It's so rich with meaning. Usually our English Bibles call it the Word, and that's true, the Word became flesh. But it also means the story, our story. Our biggest story became flesh. And it also means design. It's the design behind the universe. And Jesus is the designer who lives among us. So the Logos became flesh. The design became flesh and lived among us. Jesus is our biggest story that we should live for. So do you remember our original question? It was this. What? What do I have to do to be happy? And today we've looked at three things. Number one, we've looked at the script we get given. How can I be happy? Well, you got to do whatever it takes to be happy. But then we've seen there's a paradox to happiness. It's this, if I'm trying to be happy, why aren't I happy? Somehow by chasing happiness, we're guaranteed not to find it. And then thirdly, we discovered we need to flip the script. We shouldn't be chasing happiness. It's not about happiness. Instead, we should be living for others. It's not about happiness, but we also should be living for a bigger story than just our own. And Jesus is saying, you know what? It's not about happiness, but living in relationship with Jesus. Make Jesus the ultimate somebody in our life and living for Jesus. Make Jesus the ultimate story in our life. So where does that leave us here this morning? Well, you know, if we chase a rainbow, we can never find it. It just keeps moving further and further away. And that's because the rainbow is a byproduct of something else. The rainbow is a byproduct of the sun. If we chase the sun, we can actually find it. And we might find rainbows along the way. And it's the same. If we chase happiness, we won't find it. But happiness might just be the byproduct of something else. If we chase Jesus, the Son of God, we will find Jesus. And we might find happiness along the way. Now, one weekend, my wife and I were at home and we were cleaning the house. And I hate cleaning. There's something about cleaning that just sucks the soul out of me. So I came up with a brilliant idea. I said to my wife, hey, I've just come up with a great idea. How about you keep cleaning and I'll go surfing instead. And at the end, I'll come back and we'll celebrate that we've got a clean house. I'll take you out for dinner. And she gave me the you can go if you want to answer. Now, to you single guys, that sounds like a yes. Go if you want to. But you married guys know, no, that is a no answer disguised as a yes answer. It's saying go if you dare. So I didn't dare because I knew no matter how fun the surf was, I would be miserable if I was out of relationship with my wife. And it's the same with life. No matter what we do, no matter what we own, until we know Jesus and have Jesus in our life, we stay miserable. Many years ago, I went on a ski trip. I did a 5-week ski instructor course at Whistler Blackcomb in the Canadian Rockies. And it sounded fantastic. For 5 weeks, I was going to live on snow, have the Canadian Rockies as my backdrop, catch chairlifts up, and just ski endlessly every day for 5 weeks. But after 1 week, I got bored. And after 1 week, I got lonely. And after 1 week, I thought, this is pointless. What is the point of skiing? If I don't go up the mountain, I don't have to come down the mountain. What is the point of this? There is no net distance gained. Why am I doing this? So I was lonely, I was miserable, and I had no purpose. So one night I opened the pages of my Bible and it fell open on this psalm. And this psalm said this, how lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. Better is one day in the presence of God than 1,000 days skiing the Canadian Rockies. And suddenly I realize again, it's not what we do that makes us happy. It's not what we own that makes us happy. It's do I have Jesus in my life? Is he my somebody to share my life with? Is he my story that I live for? I have at home a bottle of red wine that someone once gave me 10 years ago. And I know it's a good bottle of wine. And it just sits there in the kitchen. And people ask me, well, when are you going to drink that bottle of wine? And I always answer, well, because it's such a good bottle of wine, I'm just waiting for the right people to drink it with. I'm waiting for the right moment. And again, it's not about the wine. It's do I have somebody to share the wine with? Do I have a reason for drinking this wine? We need somebody and we need a story in our life to be happy. And Jesus comes and he says, make me that ultimate somebody and make me that ultimate story that you live for. If we chase happiness, we will never find it. But if we chase Jesus, we will find him and he will find us. And happiness just might be a byproduct along the way. Thank you. And I look forward to question and answer time. Thanks.
So if you've yet to text your questions in, there's the number, 513-914-6389. We'll take your questions now. So thank you again, Sam, so much.
Thanks, AJ.
So a lot of good questions flowing in here, so we'll just jump right in. One that just came through, I recently listened to an interview with Dr. John Dixon,
Yes.
an Australian clergyman and professor. You know him?
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Okay.
He's 1,000 times smarter than me.
Yeah?
So if he can't answer this question, I can't.
All right. We'll see what the question is.
Sure.
He said Australia is 30 years behind America on everything except secularism and about 10 years ahead of you on secularism. Do you see this secularism resulting in an increased unhappiness in Australia? What can my church and I do in America to present happiness to our culture and demonstrate God?
Yes, so I think what John says is correct, but also Australia is very westernised. So when we talk about the westernised world, we're talking about UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and I do know this, the statistics are quite similar in that the Western world right now, we're more materially rich than we've ever been before. Like you think of what we have in our bedrooms and our living rooms, our grandparents never had that. We need bigger houses, we need bigger cars, we own more things, we live longer, we've got better medicines, we've got free Wi-Fi at McDonald's. So we've got everything. We're so materially blessed. But at the same time, in the Western world, we're disproportionately worse off than the rest of the world when it comes to depression, anxiety, and stress. And there's a secular writer called I forget his name. He wrote Tribe. He wrote Tribe. It'll come to me. Just look up Tribe. Not a Christian. And he tried to study this question. And one reason is we don't have community, but another reason is we don't have purpose. And maybe you let me riff. Mark Sayers, who's an Australian pastor down in Melbourne, has great podcasts, great books. He says we have 3 buckets, 3 tanks in our lives, and we have to fill all 3 buckets. One bucket is freedom, one bucket is meaning or purpose, the final bucket is community and belonging. And if you want more in one, you need less in the other. So if you want more in, say, relationships, well, you're going to need less in freedom because you have accountability. If you want more in purpose, well, again, you're going to need less in freedom because now you're living for something else rather than just yourself. But in the West, what's common to Australia, UK, Canada, and New Zealand is we've maxed out the freedom bucket because you've got to do whatever it takes for you to be happy. So that's freedom. That's the freedom narrative. And so we've emptied the meaning and purpose bucket, so we don't know why we're here, and we've emptied the community bucket, so now we're isolated, lonely, and depressed.
So what answers do some of these secular authors and people that philosophize about this, what do they say you should go after for purpose and happiness? They all acknowledge that it's about purpose, right? But what's their answer to it?
Yes, so they say purpose. So the secular answer, you can either go 2 ways. You can go one way, and Yuval Noah Harari is a famous atheist secular writer. He says, let's call it for what it is. There is no purpose. Stop pretending there's purpose. Purpose is just a useful fictional story that we tell ourselves, useful because that helps us survive, but it's fictional. Let's face it, we're just atoms and molecules. There's no such thing as design. There's no such thing as purpose. Get over it. You know, and so that's one answer. Or the other answer is, well, you got to discover your own purpose, create your own purpose, create your own meaning. But the problem with this is it's like a country trying to print its own money. Like the money has to be linked to an external reference point. And if we just create our own purpose, again, we're just living for ourselves and not a story bigger than ourselves. So there's no purpose that transcends who we are. So it's a valueless, meaningless, self-absorbed, empty sort of purpose. So what's fascinating is in the UK right now is a lady called, her last name's Ali, something Ali. You guys know better than I do. And so she grew up as a religious fundamentalist, Muslim, Islamic, in a country in Africa. And then because of its extremism and violence, she walked away from it, became an atheist, became a poster child for the new atheists. So she used to go around the talk circuit with Richard Dawkins. But then she, in the last year, said, secularism, it's empty. There's no purpose. There's no design, there's no value, there's no direction. We're only fooling ourselves if we say there is. So she suddenly realized, I need purpose. And she's come to the Christian faith. Because again, we can say, well, can't it be any faith? You know, well, just pick any religion, any belief system then, any story bigger than your own. But most people are like, Ali, I just wish I could remember the middle name. And Hersey Ali, that's it. Okay, thank you. Most people discover, well, we believe in love, we believe in forgiveness. What the religion with the loving, giving, sacrificing God is Jesus. So it's not just pick any faith. If I want love, if I want forgiveness, if I think those things are important, well, I actually need Jesus to be the center of my faith.
How do you talk to your friends who are not followers or believers in Jesus who say, I'm happy, I feel like I have it together, I don't think I need anything else? How do you engage them on this topic of real happiness in Jesus?
Yeah, of course you don't turn it into a debate, like, are you really? Because that's rude, that's disrespecting their narrative. So the first thing you're taught in marriage counseling is when your wife says, oh, it's cold in here. You don't go, really? Because I'm warm. You're like, how are you cold? I'm not cold. So now you've invalidated her feelings, her story, her narrative. So that never goes well. If she says she's cold, all right? And if your friend says they're happy. Take them at their word. But studies do show, like, if your happiness is linked to something shallow, again, what you do and what you own, and not a deeper purpose, come the time of a crisis, it will fall apart.
So you have talked about in some of your books staying friends with people for the long term.
Yeah.
So it sounds like what you're suggesting is maybe right now that's the case.
Yeah.
But as we have a relationship with someone, there might be a time where that
Show
falls
them
apart.
that you can be that safe person that they can open up to and be vulnerable. They have a saying, home is where you're understood. So be that home away from home for your friend so they can find an understanding person to talk to when things do fall apart.
That's good. What about, we'll flip this, the Christian who says, I am following Jesus, I feel like I've dedicated my life to pursuing him, but I don't feel happy. We have a couple questions like that. What do you say to that person?
And that's it. Jesus actually doesn't promise us happiness. And that's why I say happiness might be a byproduct along the way, but it's not guaranteed. Jesus, in all the teachings, when he says, follow me, he guarantees us suffering. He says, take up your cross, follow me, deny yourself, give up the world. So he says, follow my path of suffering, but along the way, you'll have purpose because you'll have direction and you'll have somebody to share the moment with, Jesus, because you're following him. That's what Jesus promised us, somebody and direction, a story. In Romans 8, it says, we've become co-heirs with Jesus. And we go, yes, I'm going to inherit all the treasures from God. And it says, well, and you go, well, what do I inherit? And the answer is sufferings. You inherit the sufferings of Jesus and the glories that will follow. So we inherit and we follow a path of suffering, but it's purposeful suffering. And that's what Viktor Frankl said. Don't look for suffering, but it will find you and it will make you a better person if there's purpose. And that's what Jesus guarantees us, a path, and we'll become a better person, the person that Jesus wants us to be, but it's through a path of suffering.
Yeah. You have a couple questions about your marriage chart, which you're right, I've definitely never experienced that.
Not me either. Germans. Crazy, those Europeans.
But some people are asking, If relationships bring such satisfaction, why do you see that trend in marriage where happiness is less than before marriage?
Yeah, and I guess it's how you define happiness. So if happiness is just linked to that dopamine surge, then of course dopamine can only be sustained for so long. I think again it's recalibrating yourself in those next stages of marriage, like what am I looking for in this marriage? And they do talk about the 3 layers of relationship. At first, there's attraction, and then there's intimacy, but finally there's commitment. And so you recalibrate yourself, say, you know what, this is where we are now. It's about a committed relationship where we're here for each other, and hopefully the burst of dopamine will happen along the way, and maybe we need to find ways to disequilibrate ourselves, like put yourself in an uncomfortable position, do an open mic karaoke, go bungee jumping, go rock climbing, just disequilibrate the relationship a little bit.
Love it. Let's talk about heaven. You talked about your paradoxes, the hedonic adaptation, the arrival fallacy, the hedonic fallacy. What makes heaven different? Will I get pleasure or will I get bored and tired like I do here?
Yeah, we have this wrong idea of heaven where it seems to be there, happy ever after, and that's how it will be. But the Bible explains heaven is God's kingdom coming here, and we become part of that kingdom, and now we have purpose. God has a role for us. We're actually somehow busy working God's justice, love, and mercy. We're actually quite busy. The Greeks had this idea of perfection, that if you're perfect, you never have to change because you're perfect. And if you change, now you're not perfect anymore, so it's going to be static. But it's that famous dilemma, can you step in the same river twice? No, because the river's always changing, it's moving. So maybe perfection is always changing, always moving, always flowing. So somehow I think we'll always be moving, always flowing, always changing in heaven. There'll be a direction and purpose there as well.
Awesome. Well, let's end with this. Last night and tonight, people are very curious about your testimony. How did you come to faith in Jesus, and what has it been like since for you?
Yes, a good way of understanding my testimony would be I grew up with very committed, loving Christian parents. And so I knew Jesus as long as I can remember, prayed to Jesus. So from an early age, I believed in Jesus. And I think my parents' lives was very influential on me because you could just see just how fulfilling and the peace that comes from knowing Jesus. So I believed in Jesus. But at the age of 16, I think for the first time in my life, I understood Jesus. The chaplain at my school, he got us reading the book of Romans, and for the first time, I understood how it worked. I always knew Jesus died for me on a cross, but I didn't understand why. I didn't quite get the cross thing. But when I read Romans, I realized, Jesus died for me in my place. Jesus is perfect, so I don't have to pretend to be perfect anymore. But every day is a day where Jesus makes me more and more like Jesus. So the sanctification thing. So I finally understood Jesus at 16. But at 28, when I had to make a choice between staying in full-time medicine or serving Jesus in a calling of preaching and teaching, which was incompatible with full-time medicine, so I had to give that up. I think that's for the first time Jesus became real for me. I just say, okay, this is going to cost me my life. Like, Jesus, are you real? Up until now, I can believe in you, I can understand you, but now for the first time, this is going to cost me. And gosh, I really hope you did rise from the dead, because I'm going to look really foolish, which is what Paul says. If we live a Christian life where we're going all in on this, and it's going to cost us something. So at that moment, I looked to Jesus for my identity, success, and validation, because every Asian wants to be a doctor. I know it's a stereotype, but it's true. It's a stereotype because it's true. How do you know if an Asian mum's son is a doctor? Don't worry, she will tell you. So and as an Asian, it's great being a doctor. Bank managers want to throw money at you. People at parties want to talk to you. They want to show you their rash. But when you're in ministry, no one brags about someone being in ministry. Bank managers don't want to give you their money. People at parties, you will kill the conversation when you say you're in ministry. They don't want to talk to you. So at this moment you think, okay, well, who do I look to then for my identity, my status, my validation? Jesus is now going to be my identity, status, and validation.
Wow. Well, we're really happy you said yes to him. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for
AJ.
being
Thanks
here
for having me.
and for blessing us.